Leonard Bonello, GANADO Advocates. Irina Heaver, Bolton Foundation. Moderated by Christina Scicluna, GANADO Advocates.
Hi, good morning everyone. Thank you for joining us on this panel. I just want to start off by giving the panelists just a couple of minutes to introduce themselves, their background and their experience within AI, and then we can kickstart our discussion on DAOs and legal personality. Steve, perhaps you'd like to start off?
Yes, thank you, Christina, and thank you, Iman, and all his crew for inviting me to this amazing AI AIBC Summit. My name is Steve Tendon. I'm the Managing Director of Change Strategies, offering strategy advisory services to all sorts of industries. Right now, I am working intensely with the Republic of the Marshall Islands to establish the SOV, the SOV, sovereign cryptocurrency with legal tender status. But I believe my claim to fame here is that I am probably the root cause of why we are all here gathering. In 2016, I drafted for the Ministry of Economy, Investment and Businesses the very first national strategy for the blockchain on Malta. I actually wrote the words blockchain island. I think it was the day after my birthday, and they told me I was probably not sober. Then I was invited to join Honorable Silvius Cambry's national task force as a strategy lead, and was actively working with the task force and Dr. Max GANADO on drafting these 3 laws that we heard the Prime Minister mention earlier. The 4th law, the ITAS Act, is actually a stepping stone towards a grander vision, which will take the form of this 4th law, which is upcoming, and where the key element is actually the topic of this panel. I wrote a blog post, which eventually became an article in 2018, which outlined the very essence of why we actually need these autonomous entities to be recognized as legal persons. But we will go into that soon.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Amandine?
So hello, my name is Amandine Doat. I work at Ledger. Ledger is a company selling hardware wallets, the very famous Ledger Nano S and now X, that I hope everyone has. We're also selling enterprise solutions to custody the assets for institutions. I'm heading the legal department and regulatory affairs department, so I'm pretty interested in the discussion we're going to have today. And I thank you, everyone, for having me.
Thank you. Thanks, Leonard.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Leonard Bonello. I'm a lawyer at GANADO Advocates. My background is predominantly financial regulation, especially in the field of payments, but always had a keen interest in fintech and, of course, the blockchain and AI spaces and natural evolution into this. I've also had a bit of a small part to play within the discussions and consultation process of the Maltese legislative framework, and I'm looking forward to the next step in the development of the Maltese legislative framework.
Thank you. Thanks, Irina.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be back in Malta. Thank you to the organizers, and thank you very much for coming and seeing a bunch of lawyers talking about exciting legal stuff. My name is Irina Heaver, and I work on bringing legacy businesses into the 21st century. My company operates old-fashioned businesses, gold mines, diamond mines. We are in financial services, and what we're doing now, we are bringing emerging technology to extract value for our shareholders where possible, to provide liquidity for our businesses, and of course to get as much benefit as possible from the emerging tech, what it has to offer. I'm here for purely selfish reasons. Dubai has announced, I'm based in Dubai, by the way. Dubai has announced that by 2020 we're going to be running our government on blockchain. But there is no dispute resolution process. There is no legal regime which will allow for the businesses to sort of fully get there. That's why we started bottom-up initiative. We lobbied the regulators, we lobbied the legal affairs department, and we finally have them on board, and we have their full support. We've established legal innovation initiative, and I'm on the board. And my pure selfish reasons are to pick up the best ideas from my amazing colleagues in Malta, who are so far ahead of the rest of the world, and implement them in Dubai. So thank you very much for having me here. My pen is ready to write things down.
Thanks, Irina, and thank you everyone for that introduction. So just to continue off with what Irina mentioned, Malta has been very much at the forefront in terms of developing a robust regulatory framework for the implementation of laws towards service providers who are working within this industry, and also towards issuers of certain tokens. What we're doing now is going beyond the regulation of service providers, going beyond the certification and regulation of technology arrangements, and looking towards granting, or the prospect of granting, legal personality to these so-called decentralized autonomous organizations. But I suppose what we need to first address is what exactly is a decentralized organization, as opposed to the traditional centralized governance structure we know of and we work with, and why do we need to have this legal personality granted, if we do at all. So I'd like to kickstart off the discussion basically with what exactly is a DAO, smart contracts as a decentralized concept in itself, and why do we need to have legal personality granted, if at all. So Steve, I'm happy to have you kick off this discussion, and then we'll take it in turns to see the views of the other panelists.
Right, maybe we should start with some definitions, because you rightly point out and what is a D.A.O. It's not clearly evident unless you've been looking into this for a while, but it's not difficult to grasp. If we consider what the Bitcoin network has done, we are already seeing the nascent entity, which we can call decentralized and autonomous. Why? Because the Bitcoin network, the Bitcoin protocol, and all the factors that make it work have, in practice, replaced the clearing and settlement houses that typically were in between the endpoints of the transaction. So the software has replaced a human organization. And mind you, it's functioning so well that up to date no one has complained. Why? Because the Bitcoin, at the end of the day, notwithstanding the complexity of the cryptographic algorithms and all the rest of the fault tolerance and so on, is really very simple. It's just moving a number from one wallet to another. So it's not doing anything mind-boggling. But we're going towards a world where we have extensive more capacity in terms of decentralized computation. And we will see other organizations which are much more complex in their functioning that will be replaced by software, but not any software, software that exists on a blockchain. So software that is decentralized, it's everywhere and nowhere, and that obviously poses some very heavy jurisdictional issues. And because the blockchain is this thing that remembers everything and never forgets, these entities will, in principle, exist forever, or at least for as long as that blockchain is running. So we are creating entities that will be autonomous, that are interacting with us. Think about the Bitcoin protocol. It's software that is paying the miners. Mm-hmm. So software that has employed humans. It's the opposite. It's not humans that are using software. It's software that is paying humans to do some actions. When this scenario becomes broader and broader, we are creating new entities which are autonomous and at the end of the day are interacting with us. It's that interaction that becomes the point of focus.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. And perhaps we can go into why would we need to grant legal personality to these DAO entities? Is the concept of legal personality an alien concept? Perhaps I can throw this question back at the panelists. Leonard, if you wish to comment.
Usually when I have this discussion with lawyers who are not familiar with this industry, they're just in shock when you discuss the concept of granting legal personality to DAO. But if you look at the historical perspective, legal personality is indeed a fiction. Law, on an arbitrary basis, decides to grant legal personality to a form of entity. So we've had, if you look historically, we've had legal personality for foundations, legal personality for partnerships, for limited liability companies. From a local point of view, you have municipalities, all of these having legal personality. So legal personality is actually a tool which law uses as an entity grows, an entity form grows in popularity to solve certain issues. And these issues typically relate to, first of all, capacity, sort of capacity to enter into a contract, but also with the right to have legal personality, you have also some responsibilities. And those responsibilities are typically the possibility of recourse and liability against it. So as the industry matures and there are more DAOs becoming possible contracting parties, you need to grant to those DAOs legal personality to be able to allow this industry to flourish.
Okay, thanks. Irina, would you like to add anything to the discussion on, I mean, Steve mentioned a very interesting point here when looking at granting of legal personality to software. The choice of law in itself becomes quite a headache to understand which choice of law will regulate the DAO, because there's no human element. So what are your thoughts on perhaps would you need to have the software choose its choice of law? Would it need to kind of appoint a regulator which will then regulate the mechanisms of the software? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, blockchain doesn't know borders, right? So it seems like a bit of a nonsense in imposing the jurisdictional borders for software which knows no borders, for a company that knows no borders, for software that knows no borders. What is the solution? Could a solution be creating jurisdiction which is specific for this type of companies, for this type of software, and whether it is an industry-run initiative, you know, in comparing with something that was done in medieval ages in Europe, where there was no mercantile law, so the merchants gathered together and they said, okay, now these are the rules and regulations by which we will all play. Should the industry do that? Should the industry take this initiative bottom up and to say, okay, now to protect us, because the legal personality is not only required to protect the users, the end users, but it's also required to protect the participants of this decentralized autonomous organization, because if you don't have this legal personality, the liability is on each of the participants, for example. So both sides require this protection. So I like the approaches taken by the industry, and perhaps that's one of the possible solutions.
Okay, thanks. Also, when we look at decentralized autonomous organizations, the concept of having a decentralized organization in itself presupposes the absence of a governance structure. When we look at the granting of a legal personality to these DAO entities, what comes to mind is the appointment of a responsible individual who would have intervention powers to intervene in the software should something go wrong, or should there be any material loss to the users. Maybe Amandine, you can comment on, would this impact the decentralization itself of a DAO, having an interventory party with appointed rights to intervene within the software?
Yeah, I think one of the points that would lead to the creation of a legal personality is what you said, to protect the developers, but also because this software, this code is going to stay after the death of most of them. And it's going to stay, and it will still owe some liabilities to the end consumer to protect them. So I think it gives continuity to the software itself beyond the people. So I think that's one of the main points why legal personality makes sense. I think indeed there will be a conflict between this autonomous and organization and the fact that it may be changed by other developers. So there are still many questions to be answered, and yeah, so I think that's going to be an interesting path to go through.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. And just to now focus on the attributes and qualities which a DAO should have in place for legal personality to be able to be granted to these entities. Steve, what are your thoughts on the typical features and attributes which a DAO needs to possess in order for legal personalities to be granted?
Well, it's a bit of a paradox because obviously decentralized autonomous software which exists on a blockchain cannot be regulated, period, I would say, because of its nature. So we have to intervene before the software is created. We have to entice the developers to want to make their software like a good citizen in some jurisdiction. It's not much different than the thinking of Satoshi Nakamoto when he invented the whole notion of mining. He was creating an incentive for certain people to behave in a certain way. And therefore, the idea here is that legal personality will not be granted to any sort of DAO that is out there, but only to certain DAOs that exhibit certain features, attributes, behaviors, which, of course, being software, need to be coded. So a developer or a company or a group of developers would agree to do this. Why would they do that? What is the incentive? It's simply a matter of adoption, because if we look at the situation from the other side of the consumer who are using the services of the DAO and they want to have protection because they are used to have protection in all the economic interactions or services they are using on a daily basis, if they have the choice between two DAOs, one which has legal personality and offers guarantees, and one which is totally free and does not offer guarantees, well, presumably they would favor the one that gives these guarantees. So the developer would have an incentive to implement these behaviors in order to get adopted.
Okay, thanks. Any other comments on, as I know we're running out of time, so perhaps some concluding comments on whether the granting of legal personality to these DAOs will be positive, obviously for the users and for the consumers in itself, and for the liability ring fencing. Leonard?
If I may, the trick in any solution needs to focus on creating an alternative remedy for the users. So from a drafting point of view, you can grant legal personality, you can limit the liability of the participants, but what is important that any solution needs to keep in mind the end user's protection and that there is recourse to it. A bit of a slight point, legal personality doesn't necessarily mean limited liability, so that is also another step which needs to be taken into consideration in the designation of the solution. But at the same time, since there isn't a share capital in place, since there aren't liability of directors or of mayors or of central controllers, you need to create either some form of insurance, some form of guarantee, some form of sinking fund, which will allow to achieve a similar level of protection for end users that we're used to through central forms of organizations.
Okay, thanks. Irina?
If you get a room full of lawyers, the only logical solution you would have is that we have to regulate, there needs to be rules and procedures in place, etc., etc. So the room, when the decision is being made, should not be full of lawyers. It should be full of the industry people. It should be full of users and the consumers and the developers, because this way you can come up with a solution which is. Yes, that's right. Having protections in place is fantastic, but also we cannot stifle the innovation. We cannot make it so burdensome and so prohibitive for the people to start their businesses. So there needs to be a balance.
Perhaps we'll mix the room 50-50 then. Something
Agreed.
And we're seeing it. This is actually happening in practice now. You've got the developers and the lawyers and the practitioners all working together to understand, concepts which perhaps were still a bit vague for one side or the other. So it's definitely putting a lot of different players together. Amandine, just to conclude, because I know we're running out of time.
Just to conclude, I think the theme was legal personality to DAOs. I think we may invent a new form of legal personality specifically for DAOs, and not try to implement the legal personality that we know in our laws.
So
we need to reinvent also this concept of legal personality, what it means, and how it should be created to fit to this new world.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay, thanks. That's it for this panel. Thank you everyone for your insights, and we can wrap up over here. Thanks.